Hello, and welcome to my capstone presentation on Pennsylvania's Climate Change Action Plan. My name is Eli Roth, and I'm a senior studying energy and sustainability policy at Penn State University. In 2009, the state of Pennsylvania released their final Climate Change Action Plan. The plan begins by acknowledging the unequivocal conclusion of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's fourth assessment report that the global climate system is warming due to increasing greenhouse gas concentrations. The plan cites the essential need for mitigation and adaptation strategies in the midst of impending environmental threats. These strategies ultimately begin by reducing the amount of greenhouse gases the state of Pennsylvania and others release into the atmosphere. The action plan declares a target goal of a 30% decrease in year 2000 levels of greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. 52 recommended actions outlined in the report aim to achieve a 36% reduction by 2020 while accounting for various stakeholders and consumer energy demands. Unlike the first submitted action plan, the second does not prioritize a specific target goal. Whether or not differing stakeholders support the idea of an emissions reduction target will be the focus of my capstone project. As depicted in the graph on the left, overall emissions within the United States have increased since 1990. Despite a decrease between 2008 and 2009, we are now once again seeing an upward trend in emissions. The graph on the right depicts petroleum consumption in the United States. While our consumption has decreased over the past decade or so, we're still consuming millions of barrels a day, and in order to supply our needs for transportation and energy and heating. These trends demonstrate that we do need state-specific plans, such as the Climate Change Action Plan, to address our overconsumption of petroleum and our rising emission levels. This graph shows that Pennsylvania is the third largest total emitting state in America, accounting for about 108,000 carbon dioxide emissions in 2013. In Pennsylvania, coal produces the majority of electricity, accounting for over 88 million megawatt hours in 2013. As climate science strengthens, urging the mitigation of climate change impacts and the implementation of alternative energies, governments have been forced to act. In 2008, policymakers passed the Pennsylvania Climate Change Act 70, which called for the development of statewide reports addressing the potential impact of climate change specifically in Pennsylvania. This piece of legislation was meant to establish a statewide analysis conducted by the Department of Environmental Protection that would be updated every 3 years. Through Act 70, the Climate Change Advisory Committee was created and given the task of advising the DEP. The committee is responsible for comprising work plans that contain specific recommendations for the DEP. Like most energy policies, setting an emissions reduction target goal is going to create a wide gap between differing stakeholders. Proponents of a specific target goal within the Climate Change Action Plan include the Clean Air Council, which is an independent nonprofit organization with about 8,000 members and 20 staff members located in Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and Wilmington, Delaware. Also, the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources is a proponent of the action plan. This agency in the government of Pennsylvania has a mission to, quote, conserve and sustain Pennsylvania's natural resources for present and future generations' use and enjoyment. Also, Penn Environment, a citizens-based nonprofit advocacy organization, which conducts policy research for issues affecting the environment. Also, Penn Future, which is one of the largest nonprofits in Pennsylvania, describes that they're an advocate for the Climate Change Action Plan. Their mission is as follows. Penn Future works to create a just future where nature, communities, and the economy thrive. We enforce environmental laws and advocate for the transformation of public policy, public opinion, and the marketplace to restore and protect the environment. Opponents of a specific emissions reduction target include the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization representing coal interests of around 300 members throughout Pennsylvania. They're very outspoken about regulations limiting their growth. Their CEO, John Pippy, has been particularly outspoken in opposing legislation that limits the use of coal and claims that it threatens the affordability and reliability of electricity to ratepayers in Pennsylvania. Other opponents include Range Resources, an independent oil and natural gas producing company, which is based out of Fort Worth, Texas. Gas companies like Range Resources and others, who have accumulated revenue from extracting and burning fossil fuels, have been very outspoken in their disapproval of further regulations on their industry. Another utility company is First Energy, which is a public utility company based in Akron, Ohio. They are very opposed to any sort of greenhouse gas emission regulations, since the vast amount of their electricity is produced through fossil fuels. As part of my analysis section, I decided to compare and contrast the states of Maryland, New York, and Texas to Pennsylvania. I compared their specific climate action plans, or lack thereof, with their emissions and how those emissions have either increased or decreased, and how their action plan and emission reduction goals had an impact on those changes. Maryland's retail electricity prices have not increased for consumers despite claims that emission controls would increase rates. According to the Energy Information Administration, their average retail price in 2009 was 13.08 cents per kilowatt hour. In 2012, the most recently recorded year, those retail prices dropped to 11.28 cents per kilowatt hour. Maryland had the 11th highest retail prices in the United States during 2009 and became the 13th in 2012 despite aggressive climate policies. While average electricity rates decrease, carbon dioxide emissions from electricity production also follow suit. Between 2010 and 2012, carbon dioxide emissions have consistently declined by 3,000 metric tons annually. Maryland has demonstrated the ability to both shrink their carbon dioxide emissions and maintain electricity prices. New York is another bordering state of Pennsylvania with similar characteristics that has chosen to implement an emissions reduction target goal. Through Executive Order Number 24, they established the New York Climate Action Council and set a reductions goal of 80% by 2050. By enacting this monumental climate policy, New York solidified itself as a leader in limiting greenhouse gas emissions. Two statements in the executive order truly stand out as integral to greenhouse gas reductions. Whereas, according to the scientific assessments of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, substantial reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century have the potential to minimize the most severe climate change impacts currently predicted. And whereas the reduction of global warming and limitation of climate change effects requires a collaborative international effort to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases around the globe. New York is not backing down from the responsibility to their international community. The state embraces their role in the global mitigation of climate change. Rather than passing responsibility off as other political leaders and areas have chosen. Not surprisingly, New York's aggressive target goal and action plan has produced results. Between 2008 and 2013, they reduced their emissions from fossil fuel combustion by 24 million metric tons. The electric power sector was responsible for most of this decrease, eliminating about 12 million metric tons of their carbon pollution. Texas, a state without an action plan, has increased its carbon dioxide emissions between 2009 and 2013 by about 90 million metric tons. In 2013, their emissions from fossil fuel combustion totaled 713 million metric tons of CO2, their highest since 2002 and by far the most of any state. The nearest state is California with 371 in 2013. Most emission increases have come from industrial and transportation sectors. Their industrial sector produced 50 million metric tons more CO2 in 2013 than in 2009. This is an example of a large energy-producing state allowing emissions to remain unchecked rather than containing them. As the natural gas industry continues to thrive in Texas, the prospect of legitimate political action on climate change and its drivers seems unlikely. The drastic differences between Maryland, New York, and Texas in prioritizing the lowering of greenhouse gas emissions is palpable in their efforts to formulate policy. Germany has proven to be a leader in implementing climate action policies. As the highest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in Europe at 20.6%, their federal government chose to set ambitious emission reduction targets of 40% below 1990 levels by the year 2020. This goal, enacted in 2009, is greatly dependent on the transformation of Germany's energy industry. The National Renewable Energy Action Plan aims to diversify Germany's energy production and ultimately create an economy reliant on sustainable resources. Coal-fired power plants are declining in numbers, while wind, photovoltaic, and geothermal adopt more market share. When renewable sources are providing more electricity than ever, emissions will inevitably drop. The majority of Germany's current electricity supply now derives from renewable sources at about 26.2% of the market share. Hard coal actually now controls a smaller portion of the marketplace than renewables at 17%. In 2014, greenhouse gas emissions in Germany began to fall substantially as renewable energies replaced hard coal power plants. According to a report done by Agora's Energiewende, this trend is expected to continue as coal and gas are phased out of the market. The main reason for lower CO2 emissions, according to the analysis, is that after pushing gas-fired power plants out of the market, renewables are now crowding out climate-damaging hard coal power plants. Hard coal and gas are the losers in the power mix. Lignite-fired power plants, on the other hand, are still producing at a high level. Wholesale prices in Germany dropped by about €5 per megawatt hour in 2014. It is constructive to acknowledge Germany's progress in reducing emissions, developing renewable energy, and maintaining electricity prices. This economic power has proven that aggressive climate policy can have positive implications and does not necessarily inflate energy prices. Clean energy production supports nearly 400,000 jobs in Germany, according to the Institute of Economic Structures Research. This comprises an industry which supports sectors like energy efficiency, research, and education. Germany has utilized climate policies to transform their energy industry to clean, sustainable sources, which has generated hundreds of thousands of jobs. The implications of clear, specific emission standards can motivate companies to innovate and embrace new technologies rather than resist them. Pennsylvania serves as an example of a state that constructed a climate change action plan and diminished carbon dioxide emissions at the beginning of the plan, but could not maintain the progress. In 2008, Pennsylvania emitted about 266 million metric tons from fossil fuel combustion, and that number has gone down to 246 in 2013. However, since 2009, emissions have increased by about 5 million metric tons, mostly due to the industrial sector. The quantifiable evidence shows that Pennsylvania has been negligent in their effort to curb emissions. Governmental leadership can be largely attributed to the stall in progress. 4 years of conservative policies and reluctance to place restrictions on emissions has led to Pennsylvania's current situation. Fossil fuel interests have a strong presence in Pennsylvania's political arena. Utility companies, coal miners, coal energy producers all have a significant stake in delaying stringent regulations on emissions. It's therefore necessary to enact specific target goals with which industries and high-emitting sectors must adhere to. Throughout my research into climate policy adopted by state and federal governments, those who set goals and utilize resources to develop climate action plans are typically more likely to achieve results. While Pennsylvania did construct a state-specific action plan, the updated versions lacked an emissions reduction target goal. There's uncertainty in the state's dedication about addressing its increasing CO2 emissions from fossil fuel combustion. Why was the original goal abandoned and never reinstated? How can Pennsylvania expect to limit emissions when there is no goal to achieve? These are pertinent questions that our environmental and political leadership must address. While neighboring states set target goals and ultimately achieve them, Pennsylvania slides in the opposite direction as our CO2 emissions increase. It is thus imperative that Pennsylvania emulate our neighboring states like New York and Maryland and declare a specific emissions goal. I think most would agree that developing climate change action plans and setting specific emissions reduction goals shows a certain dedication to mitigating climate change impacts. Hopefully, Pennsylvania will take advantage of this opportunity and show leadership in curbing carbon emissions. Thank you very much for your time, and I will leave you with my testimony at the Clean Power Plan public hearing in Clarion, Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Sustainability policy at Penn State. I travel here today as a young American citizen who is concerned about how our state and how our country will progress over my lifetime and for generations to come. Will powerful states like Pennsylvania lead the country and ultimately the world in transitioning our energy infrastructure to low-carbon fuels? As a student at Penn State, I've lived off campus for the majority of my college years. My house last year received our heating from a furnace powered by oil. When our oil ran out, we had to call the truck and come fill up our tank. But when we just so happened to run out of oil on a cold, bitter cold weekend, the truck couldn't come out, and we were stuck in our cold beds. So I couldn't help but wonder, why are we still relying on outdated oil furnaces when we could really just have a solar panel on our roof and provide us with all the heat we would need? Would an energy infrastructure built on alternative energy essentially eliminate the need for these outdated technologies? Pennsylvania could learn a lot from the nation Germany in developing clean energy sources. I was lucky enough to travel to Germany about 2 summers ago. And what I witnessed there was extensive wind farms, solar powers on homes, on farms. And while Pennsylvania continues to rely on mostly coal, natural gas, and oil, Germany has made a concerted effort to transform their energy infrastructure. Laws that they adopted in the year 2009 require every new home to install a renewable energy heating system. With aggressive political action such as this, Germany now produces about 75% of their electricity from renewable sources. While detractors might say, well, the United States is not Germany. Well, the fact is that the state of Pennsylvania itself has more solar energy potential than the entire nation of Germany. With pending legislation like the Clean Power Plan, our opportunity to develop and implement these clean energy strategies is now and not in the future. According to the EPA, Pennsylvania emits the 3rd highest carbon dioxide emissions of any state. Our per capita carbon dioxide emissions are at 19.22 metric tons annually, which is higher than the national average of 16.6, and significantly more than nations like India, 1.7, Brazil, 2.0, Italy, 6.4, and China, 7.4. It seems to me that Pennsylvania has a responsibility to our future generations to control our emissions by implementing renewable energy and efficiency. Legislation like the Clean Power Plan that specifically identifies an emissions reduction target is integral to the future of Pennsylvania's energy production. Without it, the state would elect to continue business as usual practices as they succumb to fossil fuel interests. And I just want to mention, this past summer I was lucky enough to travel to the nation of Iceland, who gets about 99% of their electricity from geothermal and hydropower sources. And in Iceland, we were told, and we also traveled to the glaciers, and every single glacier in Iceland is receding. So this is the kind of issues that anthropogenic climate change is really presenting. And it's not a hoax, and it's not a fraud, and we need to do